Hi, I'm Doug Van Eaton, and I'm assuming you're viewing this because you have a burning desire to pass the Level 1 CFA exam. Well, I think I can help you out with that. I don't remember much about my Level 1 CFA exam, but then again, it was over 30 years ago, before most of you were born. But I've had some experience in the meantime. I've been with Kaplan Schweser. They've been the acknowledged world leader in preparing candidates for their CFA exams for a long time. And I've had the pleasure of helping probably more CFA candidates pass their level 1 exams and their subsequent exams than anybody in the world. So I'm not going to rely on memory from my level 1 CFA exam, but we've got a lot of feedback over the years. And from candidates about what works and what doesn't, and seen the results of that. So what I plan to do in the short time we have together is to tell you about the CFA curriculum, the structure and the content, not in detail, don't get scared. But I would like to go over the curriculum topics and exam weights so you can get an idea of what you're up against. And then we'll look at the pass rates on the exam. That's supposed to be the motivational part of our little meeting here. And then what's the exam structure and the question format. And then we'll spend some significant time, compared to the rest anyway, on how to prepare for and pass the exam. And I'll explain a little bit about the study materials, study tools that we put together at Schweser and the program we've put together and how that fits with what we know from education science and experience about what works and what doesn't. So if that interests you, hang on, I'll go to the next slide. So let's talk about the curriculum at level 1. It's broken up into study sessions, 19 study sessions. Each one consists of one or more readings. Actually, there's only one study session that has one reading, and the rest of them have multiple readings. So this is how it's broken down. And each reading has what they call learning outcome statements. You've probably run into this in some other of your educational endeavors. It's all the rage these days, where they actually spell out what they expect you to learn and what they expect you to get out of the written curriculum. There's about 60 readings and about 530 of these learning outcome statements for the level 1 exam. Some of the learning outcome statements are pretty short and straightforward. What is an increase in volatility due to the value of options? Well, they go up. So pretty straightforward, and others are understand the balance sheet or something. So they're a little more open-ended, more all-encompassing. So these numbers change slightly each year, but that's not going to affect your study. So let's take a look, just as an example. Study session 2 is the first of 2 study sessions in quantitative methods. And it has 3 readings: time value of money, learn to use your calculator, figure out a loan payment, things like this. And then reading 7, statistical concepts and market returns, and reading 8, probability concepts. So those 3 readings make up the first of 2 study sessions that make up the topic area of quantitative methods. And quantitative methods will be approximately 8 to 12% of the exam questions. They used to have fixed weights, but now they've got ranges on the weights. Kind of a new wrinkle in the CFA exam testing. And so here's an example of some of the learning outcome statements that, I guess it was that 3rd reading in study session 2, probability concepts. And so it says candidates should be able to. And then it says define a random variable, an outcome, an event, mutually exclusive events, and exhaustive events. Sounds pretty easy and straightforward. And these have what's called, they call them the command words. If I get my pen over here where it works, here it is, right there. Define, that's a command word. So those might be explain, calculate, compare, contrast. They've got a whole list of them with some definitions. But it's trying to give you an idea of what you're expected to walk away from the reading with, what you're supposed to take with you, what you're supposed to have in your mind. Now, in this case, we're really just defining some things that we're going to use to build on throughout probability concepts. And the second learning outcome statement, state the two defining properties of probability and distinguish among empirical, subjective, and a priori probabilities. Again, pretty straightforward. And the third one, state the probability of an event in terms of odds for and against the event. I guess so. If you want to go to the track, you can use your probability theory there and understand the odds. So what's the purpose of those? Well, as I mentioned, focus on the relevant material for the exam, indicate the skill you should take away with you from the reading, and to some extent indicate the depth of the topic knowledge that's required. Sometimes in the CFA curriculum books, they cover things in quite a bit of depth, but you look to the LOS, the learning outcome statements, to guide you on, well, what of this am I supposed to really have in my brain to call on for the exam. Focus on those command words. And their promise is each exam question will be based on the knowledge or concepts, techniques required by one or more of these learning outcome statements. The curriculum and what we call the candidate body of knowledge comes from surveys. Okay? They get feedback from practitioners and employers. And the basic question is, what should a beginning generalist analyst know? What should they walk in the door with? And these LOSs are tested on a cycle. Of course, there's 530 of them. They can't test them all on one exam, so they test them on a cycle. But any learning outcome statement is fair game for the exam. That's an important takeaway. So what are the topic areas? Well, number one is ethical and professional standards. That's based on the Standards of Practice Handbook for CFA charter holders. And two, quantitative methods. Then econ, financial reporting and analysis. That's accounting, no matter what you call it. And corporate finance, equity investments, fixed income, debt securities, bonds, all that. Derivatives, stock or puts and calls, swaps. Alternative investments, such as private equity, venture capital, things like that. And lastly, portfolio management. Now let's look at the weights on the exam. This is where you really start to learn something about formulating a study plan and where you should be by exam day. That first one, we call it ethics for short. Okay. It will be between 15 and 20% of your exam. Now, there's no mathematics in ethics. Okay. And most of the words are defined. Okay. And there's lots of examples, but you have to read it and learn it and be able to apply it to situations. I mean, that's the main focus of this is, well, here's a situation, here's what's going on. What should you do? You know, what is the right thing to do? Or so-and-so does this. Is that wrong? Why is it wrong? This sort of things. So that could be up to a fifth of the exam. Quantitative methods, 8 to 12%, call it 10. Okay? 10% is in the middle of that. And economics, or economics if you like, is 10% as well. Financial reporting, that's up there a little. We've got a midpoint of 15% there. Could be as much as 17%. So you can see ethics and financial reporting, if they hit the high ends, that would be 37% of the exam. Well over a third of the exam on two of those. You can't ignore any of them, but you certainly can't ignore ethics and financial reporting. Corporate finance, about 10%. Equity investments, about 11%, the midpoint. Fixed income, the same, 11%. And then smaller percentages, between 5 and 8%. So what's the midpoint? 6.5, I guess. Derivatives, alternative investments, and portfolio management. And so there they've got the counts of the questions on the exams as well. Level 1 pass rates. There it is, folks. There's the number, 43%. Now, what is this 43% of? This is 43% of the people who actually show up to take the level 1 exam, not people that register it and pay all the money and everything. These are people that actually show up to take the exam. So this includes people taking it for the second time, maybe the third time, or maybe more than that. Who knows? I'm not sure what the record is. But anyway, you get the idea. Now, everybody who signs up for the level 1 exam has a college degree or is just about to get a college degree. So presumably they know how to study. They've learned things. They've gotten a college degree from a range of colleges, I'll admit, but college degrees, 4-year college degrees. And so the question becomes, what's so difficult about this? These are bright people, many of them in the industry, and they have trouble with the, what am I on, a timer? Thing just jumped forward. What's going on? Well, the one thing is, remember when you saw the topics here, okay? We had all these different topic areas. And the thing is we say sometimes about the level 1 exam, it's about this wide, covering all those topics and areas in one sitting, in one test, okay? It's not super deep. That's what level 2 and level 3 are for. But it certainly covers a broad range of topics. And you need to know it all on the same day. Well, the testing going forward, and this is a little change from what we've had over the last 30 years. The first half, 2 hours and 15 minutes, covers all the topics. And 90 questions. And the average is 90 seconds a question, a minute and a half a question. And same for the second half. They're all multiple choice. There's 3 answer choices. If you can rule out 2 or identify the right one, you're in good shape. Old exams haven't been available since 1997. So as far as somebody telling you, yeah, this is what's on the exam, well, it's prohibited by the statements candidates sign when they take the exam. They can't reveal anything about topics tested or individual questions. We can talk a little bit about the form of it or what they found most difficult or what worked well in their preparations, things like this. But as far as individual questions, topics covered, how they're covered, can't release that information. Now, both halves of the exam will cover all topics, so it's not like you can take the first half and say, oh, great. I'll know what's on the second half. They'll both cover all topics as far as we know. Computer-based testing at Prometric test centers going forward for next year. And candidates will make a testing appointment during one of 4 one-week testing windows during the year. And then just show up at Prometric and take your test there. Some exam tips: come early. My experience has been it's really best to stay calm and be well rested to the extent that you can. And being calm helps your brain work better. And we suggest you read the Standards of Practice Handbook one more time the day before the exam. It's in the CFA curriculum books. It's a number of pages, but all the examples, all the standards and substandards are in there and how they expect you to apply them. So to the extent this relies somewhat on your short-term memory, that's why we recommend reading this the day before the exam. Spend your day doing that, not looking at formulas, trying to memorize formulas, things like this. When you're taking the exam, read the questions carefully. Now, it'll be a challenge. The exam will be a challenge because of the amount of information that you need. But what you really want to minimize is exam testing mistakes, right? One of these questions where you'd go back and go, oh, I thought it said, no, you don't want to miss any of those. We want to take exam errors, testing errors down as low as we possibly can. And sometimes the more carefully you read the question, the better idea you get of what they're after. For longer questions on the exam, what I suggest, especially those with data in them or anything, don't read them and get down to the bottom, because then you're going to have to go back and get the data out of there anyway and figure out what's going on. So if you see longer questions with data or just longer, fatter questions, go to the end. Go to the end of the question and see what they're going to ask you. And then go back and read through. Otherwise, you read it twice because you got to go back after you find out what you're supposed to answer anyway in most cases. Not always the case with shorter questions, but with longer questions, that's often the case. How to prepare for the Level 1 CFA exam. Well, in terms of learning and retention, what we've learned from learning science, okay, the thing you want to do is engaged learning. And maybe that's not that easy to define, but make your study, make it hard work. Okay? Work at it as if you were going to be tested on this stuff soon after you read it and learned it. Have candidates come and say, well, I spent so many hours reading this. You know, do you think I'm prepared? Well, we have no idea. You know, there's a whole range of people's study skills and the amount of concentration and focus. But engaged learning is be engaged. Learn those bold words. If there's two terms, what's the difference between these two terms? And what I always used to think to myself as I was studying for exam is, well, if I were writing the exam, what would I ask? What would I expect somebody to know to tell me that they read and understood and fairly well knew this material without diving into the cracks, as we call it, and testing minutiae or trivia? That's certainly not what they're trying to do at CFA Institute. Repetition and long-term memory. Well, repetition is good for long-term memory. If I asked you what you had for lunch last Wednesday, you might not know. But if you thought about it long and hard and you finally figured it out, maybe looked at your credit card slips or something, you say, oh yeah, I know what I had. Well, that's fine. That's one repetition. If I ask you again a week later, hey, what'd you have for lunch on that Wednesday 2 weeks ago now? Well, I had this. At that point, it's pretty much in your long-term memory. I could ask you a year later maybe and go, hey, what'd you have on Wednesday such and such a date, you know, that we spoke about before? Well, I had this. Quit asking me. This is silly. But that's it, okay? This recall, right? Also had helped studying across topics. Certainly on your first go-through, you want to focus on a topic. But then as you're doing your review and you're doing questions, it really helps to bounce across topic areas. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's pretty clear from the studies that have been done. And one thing that's been known in education for a long time is what we call the test effect. And this has been replicated by several researchers over the years. And that test effect is take two groups. One of the groups, they both read the material, study the material. Then one of the group restudies it. They go back, read it again. And the other half, they give them quiz questions about it. And it turns out, even if they don't give them the right answers, the group that took the test, took the quiz, makes more progress than the group that read it twice. So hopefully you're drawing the conclusion that, yeah, I should probably do a fair amount of questions. And oftentimes there's some that you should do just after reading, just like they have end of reading questions in a textbook. There's a reason for that. Writing and remembering. Well, the educational science people say, no, I don't know how I turned a timer on this. The educational science people say, well, we can't really prove that taking notes while you study helps. But it's always worked for me. But the thing is, what they say is, you know, if you're really distilling the information, if you're reading it and learning it so you can compress it and deal with it and kind of dealing with the filing system of your brain while you're doing it, then that can be very, very helpful. And then, of course, review. There's just so much material. You start out studying quant, and then maybe you're taking your exam, 7 months later. Well, you're likely not going to do well on quant unless you return to it time to time, either through quizzes or just a review of key concepts and things like this, some of our summary statements and things like that to jog your memory and bring it back. For efficient learning, we got to know the extent of the material, the format, and the topic weights for your exam. Learn and understand the CFA curriculum, concepts, definition, techniques. Now you're always going back to the LOSs and going, okay, did I get what they said I had to get out of this part of this reading? Practice quizzes to learn and retain the material, of course. Learn how to take the exam successfully. Practice exams. Work on your exam timing. Work on taking three-part multiple choice questions and getting very efficient at it. And then the final preparations, right before the exam, revealing where the gaps are in your knowledge, perhaps through the Schweser mock exam, and then looking at a tutorial on those questions, and just, it's an efficient way to fill in those gaps right before you sit for your exam. So you can think about 5 steps in the exam preparation process, and we're starting you on your first step here. Learn about the exam, its topic weights, and question formats. What are you up against? And then formulate a study plan that's going to work for you. You may have to adjust it over time, but find a plan, maybe revise your plan, refresh your plan from time to time, but stick to your plan. I think that's very important. Learn the curriculum. One learning outcome statement, one study session, one topic area at a time. Now we start people out with the Schweser notes, the CFA curriculum books. We cover all the required learning outcome statements. And some people read them both. Some people rely only on the Schweser notes. Some people go to the CFA curriculum books if it's an area, if it's accounting, they've never had any accounting training, and they just say, well, I'd like to go through some more. I'd like to see some different examples. Fine. As time permits, that's the best way to go. We've got video lectures. Our video lectures follow our Schweser notes, contain the same examples and things. So they're just really an alternative. If you're a person that reads stuff, and like me, I'd rather read than watch a video. I go at my own pace, which may be even faster than a video, and I can take it in for the most part. Other people prefer the video, some combination of the two. There's certainly more detail in the Schweser notes than we can put in our videos. But the videos are broken up into modules, so if there's one area where you say, gee, maybe I'd like to see a little bit of additional explanation on this. And so that's that combination of Schweser notes and the video lectures. That's the first step. And then attend our live classes or our online classes. Hopefully we'll be offering live classes, and our online classes you can view, of course, in an on-demand version. So there's the sequence, right? Do the Schweser notes, do the module quizzes, go through the topic quizzes at the end, use the videos as you need them, and then attend class, in which we start working problems and really focusing in on some of the material that we have found candidates struggle with, and things that we think are really central core information. Now, we don't know about the probabilities of one LOS being tested versus another, but there's certain things that are just core elements that every financial analyst should know for sure, and they come up at level 2 and level 3, which kind of validates that point of view for focusing on them. Okay. And then learn and retain. We've got a Q bank with thousands of questions, so you can create your own quizzes for whatever topics, readings, study sessions you want, and that's the same thing you'll use to revisit topics over your 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-month study process. Also, we suggest you read over all the end-of-reading questions in the CFA Institute curriculum books. I say read them over. Some of them, a lot of them are not exam-like. Some aren't multiple choice. Okay? Some have very long and tedious calculations from a balance sheet or an income statement or things like this. So maybe you don't want to spend the time just grinding it out, but to read through and then think about, well, how would I approach this question? What would I do? What would I add to what things would I be looking at? And then look at how they answer the question. Just gives you a view of maybe how somebody else looked at the material, or some of the terminology, maybe some of the focus that they intend you to get out of the readings. And then take the Schweser topic quizzes and checkpoint exams. We try to give you some feedback all along the way so you know how your studying's going. You don't want to get to the end of 5 months of studying and say, yep, I studied everything in all these books, and then sit down and write a 52 on a practice exam. If you're on that path, we want to intervene, right? We want to get in sooner than that and say, look, your studying isn't quite getting you to where you need to be, and give you that feedback early on and throughout the study process. And then learn how to take the exam. Okay? That's the job on exam day. Multiple choice questions averaging 90 seconds apiece. Okay? So we have a Schweser review workshop where we do a little bit of review to bring things to the front of your mind for a topic area, but then we just go through questions, how to answer them. Oh, on this one you could rule out 2, even if you didn't know the right answer. These 2, those are clearly wrong. Or questions that look like they require long calculations, right? As a university professor, we used to use these, that they would kind of suck students in to doing long calculations. When in fact, if they understood the concept well, they could look at those 3 answer choices and go, well, these 2 are obviously bogus. It has to be negative, and pick that one. So that's what we work on in the review workshop. So you're reviewing the topics and filling in some gaps there, but also getting some real practice in successfully answering multiple choice questions. The Schweser practice exams, we got 4.5 hour practice exams, and these are to find out, hey, where have I got it, where am I in good shape, and where do I need to go back and review. So you review the answer explanations, or you can go back to the Schweser notes or the videos or the on-demand classes, or maybe go to part of the CFA Institute curriculum books. How you do that review isn't as important as that you do the review and fill in those gaps in your knowledge. So your final preparation, let's say the last 2 weeks, right? It's basically the last 4 or 5 weeks that we expect you to be doing practice exams and review intensively and having finished your initial study across the curriculum. So you can take the Schweser mock exam. We have multimedia tutorials. It's really a voiceover PowerPoint for those. And so you miss a question, you go to the answer explanation and go, I have no idea what these people are talking about, right? And so then you can go to the multimedia tutorial, and then we go back and say, hey, look, this is the topic. It's the convexity of a bond, right? And here's the characteristic. Here's the formula that you were supposed to have memorized for the approximate convexity of a bond, and here's how that applies to this question and how we expected you to get to the answer. Very efficient way of filling in those gaps. Okay. And read the Standards of Practice handbook one more time. So these are the 5 steps. We've got you covered. We've got the Schweser notes, we've got the videos, we've got the Q bank, we've got the practice quizzes all along the way to give you feedback and improve your skills. And then during the late season, we've got our review workshop, which those will be available live in many cities, hopefully. And but certainly we're beefing up our online version of that in anticipation that there may be trouble with large groups getting together. But either way, spending those days just practicing questions and getting your timing right with the practice exams and the Schweser mock exam. You don't want to spend too much time on each question, but then again, you don't want to finish early and have shortchanged them. So just the fact of taking those practice exams, and then, did I mention reading the Standards of Practice handbook? It could be almost 20% of the exam. And it's just the one book. It's a pretty easy read if you can stay awake, and that'll serve you well. So anyway, that's what we know and what we've put together from what we know and what we've learned over the years about passing the Level 1 CFA exam. So I very much hope you'll join us for that journey, and send me an email when you pass your exam. Thanks.